The library had always been a sanctuary for me. During the day, sunlight filtered through the tall, stained glass windows, illuminating rows of books that whispered tales of adventure, mystery, and far-off lands. I would often lose myself among the shelves, the scent of aged paper and polished wood wrapping around me like a comforting blanket. But tonight, as darkness enveloped the town and the last flickers of sunlight faded into oblivion, the library transformed into something altogether different. It was a stormy evening when I decided to stay late, an impulsive choice driven by the promise of finishing the novel that had captivated me for weeks. The rain lashed against the windows like 1,000 tiny fingers tapping for entry, and the wind howled outside, mimicking the cries of lost souls. As the clock struck 9, I realized I was the last person in the library. The silence was deafening, punctuated only by the occasional creak of the old building settling into the night. I pulled my chair closer to the flickering lamp at the reading table, the glow casting eerie shadows that danced around the room. I tried to focus on the words in front of me, but my mind wandered. The library had its ghosts, but I had never felt their presence this strongly. Each turn of the page felt like an invitation to the unknown, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end as I thought of all the stories trapped within these walls. That's when I heard it, a faint rustling sound coming from the aisle between the shelves. I paused, my heart racing. Surely, I was just imagining things. The old library had a reputation for being haunted, tales passed down through generations, but I never paid them much mind. I was determined to ignore the creeping dread that nestled in my stomach. Curiosity, however, got the better of me. I set my book down, the characters' fates fading from my thoughts as I pushed back my chair. As I stepped into the aisle, the air felt colder, prickling against my skin. The tall shelves loomed above me, creating a labyrinthine path that seemed to stretch infinitely. I moved cautiously, straining to hear anything beyond the sound of my own footsteps. As I rounded a corner, I stopped short. There, at the end of the aisle, a shadow flitted past, too quick for me to discern its shape. "Hello." I called out, my voice barely more than a whisper. The silence swallowed my words, and I felt a chill race down my spine. Pushing back the growing anxiety, I stepped forward, driven by an inexplicable force. I had to know what it was. The shelves seemed to warp around me, as if the library itself were shifting, guiding me deeper into its secrets. With each step, the shadows thickened, whispering secrets in a language I couldn't comprehend. My heart pounded louder, a drumbeat echoing in the stillness. I found myself in a section I had never seen before, a hidden alcove, dusty and forgotten. The books here looked ancient, their spines cracked, and the titles faded. One in particular caught my eye, its cover embossed with intricate designs that seemed to shimmer under the dim light. I reached out to touch it, and a jolt of energy coursed through my fingers. Suddenly, the library was alive with sound, the whispers of voices echoing through the aisles, rising and falling like the tide. I stepped back, heart pounding, as the whispers grew louder, forming a chorus of unintelligible words. Panic clawed at my throat. I turned to run, but the shadows seemed to reach for me, wrapping around my ankles and pulling me back. "Help me," a voice cried out, clear and desperate. I froze, my blood running cold. The walls felt as if they were closing in, suffocating me in their history. I stumbled back toward the main hall, the whispers still swirling around me, mingling with the sound of my own frantic heartbeat. I had to get out. I had to escape. But as I reached the door, it wouldn't budge. I pulled and pulled, panic rising as I realized I was trapped. The library had become a prison, and the spirits of the past were awakening, demanding to be heard. As the shadows converged, I could make out faint shapes, figures cloaked in darkness, their eyes glowing with a haunting light. They were the lost souls of those who had come before, seekers of knowledge who had never left. I had invaded their sanctuary, and now they were angry. "Leave," one of them hissed, a skeletal hand pointing toward the heart of the library. "Leave before it's too late." But I couldn't leave. The words of the novel I had been reading echoed in my mind, blending with the whispers of the library. There was a mystery here, a dark tale waiting to be unraveled. Despite the terror flooding my veins, I felt an overwhelming urge to understand. I had to know why they lingered, what had kept them bound to this place. Gathering my courage, I turned back toward the shadows. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. "Read," they whispered in unison, their voices like a chilling breeze. "Read our story, and set us free." I stood there, trembling, the weight of their gaze pressing down on me. The room grew colder, and the whispers intensified. It was as if the very essence of the library, its history, its tragedies, was imploring me to listen. "How?" I managed to ask, though doubt gnawed at me. "Find the book," they urged, their voices intertwining, a haunting melody that filled the air. "The book that holds our truth." Before I could respond, they began to dissolve into the darkness, their forms flickering like candle flames. In that moment, I understood, this library wasn't merely a collection of books, it was a vessel of stories waiting to be told, and I was somehow part of it. With a newfound sense of purpose, I turned back toward the hidden alcove. My heart raced as I scanned the shelves, searching for the book that could unlock the secrets binding these souls. Each title seemed to call out to me, begging for my attention. But one book stood apart, a thick tome bound in worn leather, its title barely legible, as if it had been forgotten by time. As I pulled it from the shelf, a rush of wind swept through the aisle, extinguishing the light from my lamp. I fumbled, my fingers trembling as I opened the book. The pages were yellowed, filled with an elegant script that told of a tragic love story, of a librarian who had dedicated her life to preserving knowledge but was betrayed by those she trusted most. The tale unfolded like a dark tapestry. The librarian had uncovered a hidden truth about the library, secrets of powerful artifacts concealed within the books themselves. But in her quest for knowledge, she had crossed paths with forces she couldn't control. Jealous of her discoveries, her colleagues had condemned her, trapping her spirit within the library's walls to guard the secrets she had unearthed. With each word I read, the whispers around me intensified, transforming from haunting echoes into a cacophony of voices, each one telling their story, each one demanding recognition. I realized these were not just lost souls, they were the remnants of those who had been wronged, their stories silenced by the very institution they had dedicated their lives to. "Release us," they pleaded, their voices rising to a desperate crescendo. "You have the power." Tears welled in my eyes as I felt their anguish. I was not merely a visitor, I had become a part of their narrative. I continued reading, delving deeper into the tale of betrayal and sorrow, and as I did, the shadows around me began to shift. The library itself responded to my voice, the walls trembling as if in recognition. As I reached the climax of the story, I felt an overwhelming urge to act. "I release you," I shouted, the words bursting forth from my lips. "I acknowledge your stories. You are not forgotten." The air thickened with energy, and the shadows swirled violently around me. I closed my eyes, feeling the library vibrating with emotion, both anguish and relief. The spirits converged upon me, their forms coalescing into one brilliant light. In that moment, I understood, I was the key to their liberation, the one who could bridge the gap between their past and my present. With a final surge of power, the library erupted in a blinding flash of light. I felt warmth envelop me, and when I opened my eyes, the shadows had receded. The whispers faded into soft sighs, and the air felt lighter, almost joyous. The spirits had found peace, their stories finally acknowledged and set free. The library was quiet again, but it was a different kind of silence. No longer oppressive, it felt welcoming. I stood alone, still clutching the book that had unlocked the truth. As I placed it back on the shelf, a sense of fulfillment washed over me. The library, once a place of fear, had transformed into a sanctuary of stories, a testament to the power of remembrance. But even as I turned to leave, I felt a lingering presence, a gentle brush against my shoulder, a whisper in my ear. "Thank you," it said, the voice echoing in the stillness. I smiled, understanding that while the spirits had moved on, their stories would live on in the pages of this library, where they would continue to whisper to anyone willing to listen. As I stepped outside into the storm, the rain no longer felt like an assault, it was a cleansing, a release. The world felt different, lighter, as if the weight of the library's history had been lifted. I took a deep breath, the fresh scent of rain and earth filling my lungs, and walked away, knowing I would return to the library, not as a trespasser, but as a keeper of its stories. And perhaps, just perhaps, there were more tales waiting to be discovered, more souls yearning for recognition. The night had revealed to me that every story matters, and in that knowledge, I found a new purpose, a guardian of the library, a voice for the voiceless, forever intertwined with the whispers of the past. I had always been drawn to the library. As a child, it was my refuge, a place where the outside world melted away and I could immerse myself in countless stories. Now, years later, as an overworked graduate student, it remained a sanctuary, albeit a more somber one. The university library was an imposing structure, an old building with stone walls and dark wood interiors, where echoes of footsteps seemed to linger long after the last person had left. One evening, driven by a deadline and a mounting sense of dread, I decided to stay late. The rain beat down against the windows, blurring the outside world and trapping me in a cocoon of silence. I settled into my usual nook, surrounded by towering shelves of books, their spines lined up like sentinels guarding centuries of knowledge. Hours passed as I pored over my notes, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. It wasn't the usual sensation of someone peering over my shoulder, it felt more like the weight of unseen eyes, scrutinizing my every move. The library had its share of ghost stories, tales of restless spirits wandering the aisles, but I had always dismissed them as mere folklore. As the clock ticked toward midnight, the lights flickered, momentarily plunging me into darkness. I looked up, startled, and caught a glimpse of a shadow flitting between the shelves. Heart racing, I called out, "Hello? Is anyone there?" My voice echoed back, a lonely sound swallowed by the library's vastness. Steeling myself, I decided to investigate. I set my papers aside and walked down the nearest aisle, the sound of my footsteps muted by the thick carpet. The air grew colder, and with each step, the whispers began, a faint murmuring that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere all at once. I strained to hear the words, but they slipped through my fingers like smoke. The further I ventured, the more the atmosphere shifted. It was as if the very essence of the library had changed, warping into something sinister. I found myself in a section I had never seen before, a narrow aisle shrouded in shadow. Dust motes floated in the dim light, and the air was thick with an almost palpable tension. At the end of the aisle stood an ornate wooden door, partially ajar. I could feel an inexplicable pull, a magnetic force drawing me closer. With a shaky hand, I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was a stark contrast to the rest of the library. It was small and cluttered, filled with stacks of books piled haphazardly, their pages yellowed with age. An antique desk sat in the center, covered in a layer of dust, and a single flickering candle cast dancing shadows on the walls. On the desk lay a diary, its leather cover cracked and worn. I approached cautiously, my curiosity overcoming my apprehension. As I opened the diary, the pages creaked, revealing neat, looping handwriting. The entries were dated over 100 years ago and spoke of the author's obsession with uncovering the hidden truths of the library. "Secrets lie within these walls," one entry read. "I have seen the shadows move, felt the weight of their sorrow. They watch us, waiting for someone to remember their names." A chill ran down my spine. The whispers grew louder, swirling around me like a storm, and I felt the temperature drop even further. "Who are you?" I whispered, the words escaping my lips before I could stop myself. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind me, plunging the room into darkness. I fumbled for my phone, the screen's light flickering weakly as I illuminated the diary once more. The next entry sent a shiver through me. I have discovered the fate of those who linger here. They are trapped, bound to this place by the knowledge they sought, their stories left untold. I fear I may become one of them. Before I could process this revelation, I heard a soft, mournful wail. It echoed through the room, reverberating off the walls. I spun around, heart pounding, and saw shadows coalescing in the corners, their forms twisting and writhing as if in pain. "Please," I begged, my voice shaking. "What do you want?" "Remember us," a voice replied, sorrowful and low. "Set us free." I took a step back, overwhelmed. The shadows seemed to draw closer, and I felt an overwhelming wave of despair wash over me. It was as if their grief was seeping into my bones, a deep sorrow that threatened to engulf me. "Tell me your stories," I urged, desperation rising in my throat. "I'll remember you." In that moment, the shadows flickered, and I felt a rush of energy. Images flooded my mind, fragments of lives lived and lost. I saw a woman with bright eyes, her hands stained with ink as she pored over manuscripts. A man with a fierce passion for knowledge, his dreams shattered by betrayal. They were stories of ambition, love, and loss, interwoven like the threads of a tapestry. "Remember," they urged, their voices blending into a haunting chorus. "You are our only hope." With each story, the shadows grew brighter, their forms less defined. I grasped the diary tightly, determined to write down their tales, to honor their memories. I began to scribble furiously, letting their voices guide my hand. The room pulsated with energy as I wrote, and the air grew warmer, filled with the fragrance of old books and ink. The shadows swirled around me, a whirlwind of emotions. I could feel their gratitude and their lingering sorrow, but as I penned the final words of their stories, a profound sense of peace settled over the room. As I finished, the shadows began to lift, their forms shimmering like candle flames in the wind. "Thank you," they whispered, their voices softer now, laced with relief. "You have set us free." With that, the door creaked open, allowing light to spill into the room. I stepped outside, my heart racing, but I felt lighter somehow, as if a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. The library no longer felt like a prison but a sanctuary of stories, a place where the past could finally rest. I glanced back at the room filled with shadows, now bathed in warm light. I would return, I promised myself, to share what I had learned. I would honor those who had once been lost within the stacks of sorrow. As I walked toward the exit, the rain had stopped, leaving behind a fresh scent of earth and promise. The library stood tall and inviting, its stone walls no longer looming but welcoming. I stepped out into the cool night, knowing that I had not just freed the spirits trapped within but had also discovered a purpose for myself, a guardian of forgotten tales, a vessel for voices yearning to be heard. And with that realization, I felt a new chapter begin, not just for the spirits of the library but for myself as well. The university library loomed over campus, an ancient structure with ivy-clad walls and a spire that pierced the sky. To most students, it was a maze of dusty books and quiet study rooms, but to me, it was a place of refuge. I was drawn to its labyrinthine aisles, where stories whispered secrets from the past. I had spent countless hours there, but tonight felt different. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the wooden floors, I found myself deep in the stacks, desperately trying to finish a research paper. The library was eerily quiet, the usual hum of students was replaced by an unsettling stillness. I checked the clock, midnight. I was the only soul left, or so I thought. I was absorbed in my work when I heard a soft thud behind me. I turned quickly, but the aisle was empty, filled only with rows of books watching silently. I shook off the feeling of unease and returned to my notes, though my concentration was shattered. Something about the library felt alive tonight, as if it breathed alongside me. Minutes later, the lights flickered and went out, plunging the library into darkness. I fumbled for my phone, its weak light illuminating the space around me. In that moment of vulnerability, I noticed a flicker at the end of the aisle, a single candle, its flame dancing in the stillness. My heart raced. I wasn't alone. Compelled by a mix of fear and curiosity, I moved toward the flickering light. As I approached, I saw a figure hunched over a desk, its features obscured by shadows. "Hello?" I called, my voice trembling. The figure didn't move. I stepped closer, and my heart dropped. The desk was covered in dusty books, and the figure appeared to be scribbling furiously in a large ledger. "Are you okay?" I asked, but still, there was no response. The atmosphere thickened, wrapping around me like a shroud. I cleared my throat. "Can I help you?" The words felt hollow in the oppressive silence. The figure's hand paused, and slowly, it turned to face me. I recoiled. The figure was a woman, her skin pale and her eyes sunken, as if she hadn't seen daylight in years. "You shouldn't be here," she rasped, her voice like gravel. "This place is cursed." "Cursed?" I echoed, the weight of her words sinking in. "What do you mean?" "The stories within these walls, they hunger for truth, for recognition. I was the keeper of them, but I failed." She gestured to the ledger, its pages filled with frantic scrawls. "Now, they consume me, and I cannot escape." "What do you mean by consume?" My curiosity piqued despite the fear gnawing at my insides. "What stories?" "Lost souls," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Those who sought knowledge and were never acknowledged. They linger, waiting for someone to remember them. I thought I could help them, but instead, I became their prisoner." I stepped back, feeling a chill run through me. Is that why the library feels different? Why it's so quiet? "Every night, they come," she continued, her eyes wide with fear. "And every night, I write their stories, hoping to free them. But they grow stronger, and I grow weaker." A sense of urgency filled the air, and I felt an overwhelming need to help her. "What can I do?" I asked, my heart pounding. "How can I help?" "Read," she urged, pointing to the ledger. "Read their stories. Acknowledge them. It is the only way to break the curse." With shaking hands, I approached the desk and peered at the ledger. The words blurred before my eyes, an incomprehensible mix of names and dates, each one seemingly trapped in sorrow. I flipped through the pages, and as I did, the room began to shift. The air thickened, and I could hear whispers rising from the depths of the library, echoing with grief and longing. "Remember us," they chanted, their voices intertwining in a mournful symphony. "Acknowledge our pain." I began to read aloud, my voice trembling as I stumbled over the names: Evelyn, Thomas, Margaret, each one followed by a tragic tale of ambition, betrayal, and despair. The room grew colder, and shadows stretched across the walls, writhing as if in response to my words. The candle flickered dangerously, and the woman's gaze bore into me, a mixture of hope and dread. As I read, the whispers grew louder, swirling around me like a tempest. I felt their sorrow washing over me, filling my lungs until I could barely breathe. "I see you," I gasped, overwhelmed by the weight of their stories. "I remember you." In that moment, the shadows surged forward, coiling around the woman. "No!" I shouted, but it was too late. The darkness enveloped her, and I watched in horror as she began to fade, her form dissolving into the very air she had warned me about. "Finish the stories," she cried, her voice echoing as she disappeared. "Free us." Panicking, I turned back to the ledger, my heart racing as I read faster, each name tumbling from my lips like a desperate prayer. Evelyn was a scholar who, Thomas sought to discover the truth of, Margaret loved fiercely, only to be betrayed. The shadows pulsed, growing restless, and I felt a strange connection to the tales. Their joys, their sorrows, their regrets became my own. I was their voice, and as I read, I sensed the darkness retreating, the weight of their pain lifting. With one final push, I shouted the last name, Frederick, who wanted only to be remembered. And in that instant, a blinding light burst forth, flooding the room and washing over me like a cleansing tide. The shadows shrieked, their cries echoing in a cacophony of anguish as they dissipated into nothingness. Silence fell, heavy and profound. The ledger slipped from my hands, landing softly on the desk. I felt dizzy, as if I had been submerged in water and was finally breaking the surface. The woman's presence lingered, but now it was warm, comforting, no longer filled with despair. I looked around the room, now bright and airy, the oppressive weight gone. The library had transformed into a sanctuary, filled with light and possibility. I understood then that the curse had been lifted, not just for the lost souls, but for the library itself. As I stepped back into the main hall, I felt a sense of peace enveloping me. The whispers had faded, replaced by the soft rustle of pages turning and the distant sound of footsteps. The library was alive again, not with despair but with hope. I took a deep breath, feeling the warmth of the candlelight behind me. The stories would live on, no longer trapped in the darkness. I had become their keeper, their voice, and I knew I would return to continue sharing their tales. Leaving the library that night, I felt lighter, as if I had shed a burden I hadn't even realized I carried. The moon shone brightly overhead, illuminating the path ahead. The library was no longer just a place of knowledge, it was a living testament to the power of remembrance, a reminder that every story deserves to be told, and every soul deserves to be free. The old city library had always intrigued me, a Gothic structure nestled between modern buildings, its stone facade worn by time and weather. As a graduate student in history, I had often escaped into its depths, losing myself in the scent of aged paper and the echo of whispered stories. But on this particular night, as the clock struck midnight, the library felt like a different world, one filled with shadows and secrets best left undisturbed. I was deep in my research, poring over rare manuscripts in the restricted section, a dimly lit room filled with dust and the weight of forgotten knowledge. The flickering fluorescent lights overhead created a stuttering glow, and the silence was so profound it pressed against my ears. I was supposed to be alone, at least, that's what I had thought. As I turned the fragile pages of a century-old book, a cold draft swept through the room, snuffing out my desk lamp. Panic surged in my chest, and I fumbled for my phone, its screen casting a weak light over the sprawling chaos of books. That's when I heard it, a soft, low moan, echoing through the aisles. My heart raced, and I strained to listen. "Hello?" I called out, my voice shaking. "Is anyone there?" Silence enveloped me again, thick and suffocating. I stood, the dim glow of my phone illuminating the rows of shelves. The air felt charged, as if the library itself was holding its breath. I made my way toward the source of the noise, drawn by an inexplicable force. As I moved deeper into the aisles, the moans morphed into whispers, frantic, sorrowful murmurs that seemed to curl around me, pulling me closer to an unseen presence. I reached a tall, ornate shelf adorned with intricate carvings of mythical creatures. At its base lay a book I had never seen before, bound in cracked leather and exuding a strange energy. I knelt to pick it up, the whispers intensifying as my fingers brushed against its cover. The title was embossed in gold, The Archivist's Lament. A chill raced down my spine, and a sense of dread washed over me. I opened the book, revealing pages filled with cramped, frantic handwriting. It chronicled the life of a librarian who had become obsessed with preserving every story within the library's walls, a woman who had sacrificed her own happiness for the sake of the books. As I read, the atmosphere shifted. I could feel the weight of her sorrow pressing against me, filling the air with an oppressive energy. The whispers grew louder, forming a cacophony of voices that begged for attention. Remember us, they cried. Acknowledge our pain. I realized with horror that these were not just stories, they were the echoes of the lost souls bound within the library, those who had sought knowledge and been consumed by it. The archivist had made a pact to save their stories, but in doing so, she had trapped herself, forever wandering the aisles in search of release. Please, I whispered, glancing around the room, I acknowledge you. I will remember your stories. The air crackled with energy, and for a moment, I felt a connection to the voices, an understanding of their anguish. But the shadows thickened, swirling around me as if the library itself was alive and angry. The archivist's figure began to materialize from the darkness, a gaunt woman with hollow eyes, her face twisted in despair. You should not have come here, she rasped, her voice echoing like a distant thunderstorm. You are not meant to uncover the truth. I stumbled back, clutching the book. I want to help you. I shouted, desperation rising in my throat. How can I free you? Only through the stories, she replied, her voice filled with anguish. You must read them. You must bear witness to our pain. Gathering my courage, I turned back to the book, my heart pounding as I began to read aloud. Each word felt like a dagger, piercing through the silence of the library, awakening the trapped souls within the shelves. The shadows writhed, a storm of sorrow and longing, as I spoke their names: Eleanor, a poet who had written her heart out only to be forgotten; Jonathan, a scholar who sought the truth but was buried under the weight of his discoveries. With each name, the energy in the room shifted. The shadows pulsated around me, growing brighter with each story I recounted. Eleanor lost her voice to the echoes of silence, Jonathan died with secrets locked away, the archivist hovered closer, her gaze intense, as if searching for something within me. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed through the library, and the lights flickered back to life. I glanced around, disoriented. The whispers were louder than ever, a storm of voices surrounding me, begging for release. Finish the stories, they urged, their cries a mixture of hope and desperation. I pushed through my fear, reading faster, feeling the connection to the stories deepen. The walls of the library seemed to close in, the shadows pressing against me, but I held my ground. Margaret's dreams shattered like glass, Henry wrote furiously until he could write no more. The air surged with energy, and the archivist's form flickered, wavering between existence and oblivion. You must finish, she urged, her voice rising above the chaos. Or we will all be lost. With a final surge of determination, I read the last entry, my voice echoing through the library. And in her final moment, the archivist realized that to preserve the stories, she must first let them go. As I spoke the last word, a blinding light erupted, filling the room and enveloping me in warmth. I felt the weight of countless souls lifting from my shoulders, their whispers transforming into sighs of relief. The shadows unraveled, spiraling upwards into the light, freeing the souls that had been trapped for so long. The archivist's figure shimmered, her expression shifting from despair to gratitude. Thank you, she whispered, her voice now a gentle breeze. You have set us free. With that, she faded into the light, and the library returned to its stillness. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, leaving behind a sense of peace. I stood there, heart racing, feeling a profound connection to the stories that had once been hidden in the shadows. As I made my way back to the main hall, I knew I would never forget this night. The library had transformed, no longer a place of sorrow but a sanctuary of stories. I had become a keeper of their tales, a voice for those who had once been silenced. Stepping outside into the cool night air, I felt the weight of the world lift from my shoulders. The moon shone brightly above, illuminating the path ahead. I realized then that every story matters, every voice deserves to be heard. And as long as I had breath in my lungs, I would carry their stories with me, ensuring they would never be forgotten again.